This is completely inappropriate, and I've already spoken to Kevin about it." Her voice carried genuine distress, and I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude toward my mother-in-law. Despite all the complications in our relationship over the years, she was firmly in my corner tonight. "Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate that more than you know." She squeezed my shoulder gently before continuing toward the kitchen area, her posture radiating the kind of maternal fury that could level mountains when properly motivated. The band announced that they were taking a short break, and couples began leaving the dance floor to return to their tables or visit the bar. Ryan and Amanda, however, seemed in no hurry to separate. They moved toward the edge of the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the country club's spectacular desert landscaping. Even from across the room, I could see the animated nature of their conversation, the way Amanda kept touching his arm, the way Ryan leaned in close to hear her over the ambient noise of the reception. "I need some air," I announced, standing. Abruptly. Nicole immediately moved to join me, but I held up a hand. "No, stay here. Keep an eye on things. I just need a few minutes to think." The terrace was blissfully cool compared to the warmth of the crowded ballroom, and I found Tyler exactly where Emma had said he'd be, standing near the railing with several other young people who were clearly more interested in their phones than the wedding festivities. He looked up when I approached, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of his father. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, moving away from the group to speak privately with me. At 18, Tyler was already taller than Ryan, with my dark hair and his father's broad shoulders. In a few months, he'd be leaving for Arizona State University, and moments like this reminded me how much I was going to miss having him around to be my protector. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just needed some fresh air." It was a lie, and we both knew it, but sometimes maternal lies are necessary to preserve the illusion of adult competence. "How are you holding up?" Tyler's expression darkened. "I don't understand what he's doing, Mom. Everyone can see it." "Uncle Kevin is furious, and Grandma Patricia looks like she wants to throw something at Dad's head." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture he'd inherited from me. "Should I go say something to him?" "Absolutely not," I said, firmly. "This is between your father and me. I don't want you or Emma caught in the middle of this, whatever this turns out to be." Even as I said it, I knew it was probably too late for that. When a marriage implodes publicly, there's rarely a way to shield the children from the fallout entirely. Through the windows, I could see that Ryan and Amanda had moved even closer to the edge of the dance floor. She was showing him something on her phone, and they were both laughing in a way that suggested shared memories and inside jokes. The sight made something cold and hard settle in my chest, replacing the initial shock and hurt with something far more dangerous. Nicole appeared at my side, having apparently decided that my request for alone time had expired. "The bride and groom are getting ready to cut the cake," she announced. "And Kevin specifically asked me to find Ryan because he wants him standing nearby for the photos." Her tone suggested that Kevin's request had not been delivered politely. I nodded, understanding the subtext. Kevin was giving his brother an opportunity to extract himself from the situation gracefully before it became an even bigger spectacle. It was a generous gesture, considering that Ryan's behavior was threatening to overshadow what should have been Kevin and Samantha's perfect day. "Let's go back in," I decided. "I want to see how this plays out." The cake-cutting ceremony was a traditional affair, with Samantha and Kevin posing for what seemed like hundreds of photos, while the wedding photographer captured every angle of their happiness. Ryan did eventually join the family group photos, but not before Amanda whispered something in his ear that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen in months. When he finally took his place next to me for the family pictures, his cologne carried the faint scent of Amanda's perfume, a floral fragrance that was nothing like anything I'd ever worn. "Having fun?" I asked quietly as the photographer adjusted his lighting setup. Ryan's smile was tight and defensive, Just catching up with an old friend. You remember Amanda from college, don't you? His tone was casual, but there was a challenge underneath it, as if he was daring me to make a scene in front of his family. Of course I remember Amanda, I replied smoothly. I'm just surprised she made the guest list. I didn't realize she and Kevin were close. It was a pointed observation, and we both knew it. Kevin barely knew Amanda, and her presence at his wedding was entirely due to Ryan's influence. Before Ryan could respond, the photographer called for our attention, and we were forced into the familiar charade of matrimonial happiness for the camera. I smiled and posed and played my part, but inside I was calculating, counting, planning. Because somewhere between watching my husband dance with his ex-girlfriend and standing here pretending that everything was fine, I'd made a decision that would change everything. This marriage was over. The only question now was how I was going to end it on my terms. As the photography session concluded and guests began moving toward the dessert table, I caught sight of Amanda near the bar, ordering another drink and checking her phone. She looked perfectly at ease, as if disrupting someone else's marriage was just another item on her evening's agenda. The sight of her casual confidence sparked something fierce and protective in my chest. Ryan had made his choice tonight, in front of his family, at his brother's wedding, with our children watching. The music swelled across the Desert Rose Country Club's elegant ballroom as couples began moving toward the dance floor. May evenings in Phoenix carry a certain magic when the desert heat finally breaks and the sunset paints everything in shades of amber and rose. I should have been enjoying this moment, watching my brother-in-law Kevin finally marry the love of his life, Samantha. Instead, I found myself frozen at table 7, watching my husband of 12 years wrap his arms around another woman. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ryan had excused himself during dinner, claiming he needed to take an important business call about a construction project in Scottsdale. 20 minutes later, I spotted him across the crowded ballroom, not on his phone, but pulling Amanda Cole onto the dance floor. His ex-girlfriend from college. The woman he'd dated for 3 years before we met. The same Amanda who had somehow managed to secure an invitation to his brother's wedding, despite having no connection to the Thompson family beyond their ancient history. My name is Jessica Martinez, and at 38 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. Married to a successful construction company owner, mother to 2 incredible teenagers, and building my own career as a senior marketing director at a growing firm in Tempe. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect Phoenix power couple. Ryan's business was thriving. We lived in a beautiful home in North Scottsdale with mountain views, and our kids were excelling in school. But as I watched my husband's hands settle possessively on Amanda's waist, swaying to a slow jazz number that the band was playing with far too much romantic flair, I realized that perfect facades can crumble in an instant. The Desert Rose Country Club had been Kevin and Samantha's dream venue, with its sprawling views of Camelback Mountain and elegant Southwestern architecture. Tonight, the main ballroom was transformed with thousands of twinkling lights, desert, florals in deep burgundy and sage green, and enough romantic ambiance to make even the most cynical heart believe in love. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was discovering the death of my own marriage at a celebration of someone else's beginning. Ryan moved with Amanda like they'd never stopped dancing together. His hand traced the small of her back in a way that was far too intimate for a casual dance between old friends. She tilted her head back, laughing at something he whispered in her ear, and I felt the familiar twist of jealousy mixed with something new and far more dangerous. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage that cut through the Arizona evening like a blade. From across the table, my best friend Nicole Chen caught my eye. She'd been watching the same scene unfold, her expression darkening with each passing moment. Nicole and I had been friends since college, and she'd never particularly liked Ryan, though she'd been diplomatic enough to keep her reservations mostly to herself over the years. Tonight, however, her usual tact was nowhere to be found. "Are you seeing this?" she hissed under her breath, leaning close enough that her words wouldn't carry to the other guests at our table. Patricia Thompson, Ryan's mother, sat just 2 seats away, pointedly looking anywhere except at her son and his dance partner. The woman's discomfort was palpable, her fingers drumming nervously against her champagne glass as she made stilted conversation with Samantha's parents. I nodded slightly, not trusting my voice. The song seemed to stretch on forever, each note feeling like a small torture. Around us, other couples swayed and turned, lost in their own romantic bubbles, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Or perhaps they were aware, and simply too polite to stare openly at the train wreck that was my marriage playing out on the dance floor. Emma, my 16-year-old daughter, appeared at my elbow with the silent grace that teenagers somehow master when they want to avoid drawing adult attention. "Mom," she whispered, "what's Dad doing?" Her voice carried the particular mixture of embarrassment and confusion that comes from watching a parent behave in a way that defies explanation. "I honestly don't know, sweetheart," I managed, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Why don't you go find your brother and see if he wants some cake?" It was a transparent attempt to get her away from the situation, but Emma was too smart to be easily diverted. "Tyler's already seen it," she said quietly. "He's pretty upset. He's outside on the terrace with some of the other kids, but he keeps looking in here like he wants to do something about it." My 18-year-old son had inherited both my protective instincts and his father's temper, a combination that could prove explosive in situations like this. The song finally ended, but instead of returning to our table, Ryan and Amanda remained on the dance floor, talking closely as the band transitioned into something more upbeat. Other couples began to filter off, but they seemed content to continue their private conversation in the middle of the crowd. Ryan's hand remained on Amanda's arm, his body language suggesting an intimacy that made my stomach churn. Nicole placed her hand over mine, squeezing gently. "Do you want to leave?" she asked quietly. "We could make some excuse about the kids having school tomorrow." I shook my head, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "No, I'm not running away from this." The words came out with more conviction than I'd expected, and I realized that somewhere in the past 10 minutes, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but it was being rapidly overtaken by something else: determination. "Good for you," Nicole murmured approvingly. "What's the plan?" That was Nicole, always ready to jump into battle mode. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and also one of the reasons she'd built such a successful career as a litigation attorney. She had the instincts of a warrior wrapped in the package of a petite woman who looked like she'd be more at home organizing charity galas than destroying opposing counsel in court. Before I could answer, Amanda's laugh rang out across the ballroom, bright and artificial. She was looking directly at our table as she laughed, her gaze meeting mine for just a moment before sliding away. The look in her eyes wasn't apologetic or embarrassed. It was triumphant. That single glance told me everything I needed to know about the nature of this dance, this conversation, this entire situation. This wasn't an innocent reunion between old friends. This was a declaration of war. Patricia Thompson chose that moment to excuse herself from the table, murmuring something about needing to check on the wedding cake service. As she passed behind my chair, she leaned down slightly and spoke so quietly that only I could hear her. "I'm so sorry, Jessica." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd chosen to humiliate me publicly, to flaunt his connection with another woman, to treat our marriage as something disposable and unworthy of basic respect. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He thought I was the same woman who had married him 12 years ago. The woman who had put his dreams ahead of her own, who had made his success her priority, who had built her entire identity around being Mrs. Ryan Thompson. He was wrong about that. Dead wrong. The woman he'd married might have been devastated by tonight's betrayal. She might have gone home quietly, cried into her pillow, and spent weeks trying to figure out how to save a marriage that was already over. But that woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who had spent the last 8 months preparing for exactly this moment. As the evening wore on and the reception began to wind down, I maintained my composure, socialized with the other guests, and played the part of the gracious sister-in-law. But underneath my calm exterior, my mind was racing through the details of a plan that had been months in the making. A plan that Ryan knew nothing about. A plan that would soon turn his moment of triumph into the beginning of his downfall. Because while he'd been busy rekindling old flames, I'd been busy building new alliances. And tomorrow, the real game would begin. 8 months earlier, I had been a completely different woman. The kind of wife who believed that marriage meant weathering storms together, that love could overcome any obstacle, and that trust was something sacred between two people who had built a life together. That version of Jessica Martinez had died on a Tuesday morning in September when I discovered Ryan's text messages while his phone charged on the kitchen counter. He'd left for an early morning meeting at a construction site in Chandler, rushing out the door with his usual kiss on my cheek and promises to be home for dinner. Emma was already at school, Tyler was at football practice, and I was enjoying a rare quiet moment with my coffee when Ryan's phone buzzed repeatedly. Thinking it might be an emergency from one of his construction crews, I glanced at the screen. The messages weren't from any construction worker, they were from Amanda, and they contained explicit photos that left absolutely no doubt about the nature of their renewed relationship. Photo after photo of intimate moments that had clearly been taken in hotel rooms I'd never seen, wearing lingerie I'd never owned. The timestamps showed messages dating back over 6 months, a systematic documentation of an affair that had been flourishing while I'd been planning family vacations and anniversary dinners. I stood in my kitchen that morning, holding my husband's phone with trembling hands, feeling my entire world shift beneath my feet. 24 hours earlier, I'd been worried about whether Tyler would get into his preferred college, and whether Emma's anxiety about her upcoming driving test was normal teenage stress. Now, I was staring at evidence that my marriage had been a lie for half a year. The rational part of my mind told me to confront Ryan immediately, to demand explanations and apologies and promises to end the affair. The rational part of my mind believed that 12 years of marriage and 2 children together meant something, that this betrayal could be addressed through counseling and commitment and hard work. But there was another part of me, a quieter voice that had been growing stronger over the years, that whispered something entirely different. That voice reminded me of all the times Ryan had dismissed my career as just a hobby, how he'd convinced me to turn down a promotion that would have required travel because the family needed me home. It reminded me of the way he'd gradually isolated me from friends who asked too many questions about his late nights and weekend trips. It reminded me of the financial arrangements he'd insisted upon, keeping most of our assets in his name for tax purposes, while my salary went toward household expenses and the children's activities. That voice told me that a man who could conduct a 6-month affair with such calculation and cruelty wouldn't hesitate to destroy me in a divorce if I gave him the chance to prepare. It told me that if I was going to survive this betrayal, I needed to be smarter than I'd ever been before. So instead of confronting Ryan that Tuesday morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable to the old Jessica. I took photographs of every message, every image, every piece of evidence on his phone. I documented dates and times and locations. Then I put his phone back exactly where I'd found it and went to work as if nothing had happened. The hardest part wasn't pretending that my marriage wasn't crumbling around me. The hardest part was looking at my children and knowing that their father was systematically destroying their family while they remained blissfully unaware. Emma was in the middle of her junior year, focused on college applications and maintaining her near-perfect GPA. Tyler was team captain of his football team and dating a sweet girl named Maya, who made him smile in ways that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with young love stories. I couldn't bring myself to shatter their world until I was certain I could protect them from the worst of the fallout. That's how I found myself sitting across from Detective James Wilson on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks later. James wasn't actually a detective anymore. He'd retired from the Phoenix Police Department 5 years earlier to start his own private investigation firm. Nicole had recommended him after a particularly nasty divorce case she'd handled, describing him as someone who could find information that others missed and who understood the delicate nature of family situations. James was nothing like the private investigators I'd seen in movies. He was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to see everything without judgment. His office in a modest strip mall near downtown Phoenix was sparse, but professional, decorated with commendations from his police career and family photos that spoke to a man who understood the value of the relationships he was hired to protect or expose. "Tell me what you know," he said simply after I'd explained the basic situation. No dramatic promises about uncovering secrets, no assurances that everything would work out fine. Just a straightforward request for information from someone who had clearly heard similar stories many times before. I handed him a folder containing printed copies of every message and photo I'd found, along with a timeline I'd constructed of Ryan's suspicious activities over the past year. Late nights that supposedly involved client emergencies, weekend trips, to job sites in remote locations. Charges on our credit cards that didn't match any receipts I could find. James reviewed the materials methodically, occasionally asking questions about specific dates or locations. His expression remained neutral throughout, but I caught him shaking his head slightly when he reached the more explicit messages. "How long has this been going on?" he asked finally. "Based on what I found, at least 6 months, but I suspect it might be longer. Ryan and Amanda dated in college before we met. She's been divorced for about 2 years now, and she moved back to Phoenix around the time these messages started." James nodded, making notes in a leather portfolio. "What exactly do you want me to find out? Are you looking for evidence for a divorce proceeding, or do you want to know if there are other women, or are you hoping to find something that might save the marriage?" The question forced me to articulate something I'd been avoiding thinking about directly. "I want to know everything. Every detail of this affair, every lie he's told, every way he's betrayed our family. And I want to know about our finances. Ryan handles all of our investments and business accounts, and I'm starting to realize how little I actually know about our real financial situation." "That's smart thinking," James said approvingly. "A lot of people in your situation focus only on the emotional betrayal and miss the financial manipulation that often goes along with it. Hidden assets, secret accounts, business expenses that aren't actually business-related. I've seen cases where the cheating spouse has been systematically moving money for years, preparing for the divorce before their partner even knows there's a problem. The thought that Ryan might have been planning to leave me for longer than I'd realized was terrifying, but it also strengthened my resolve. If he'd been treating our marriage as a temporary arrangement while planning his exit strategy, then I owed it to myself and my children to develop my own plan. "There's something else," I said, pulling out another folder. "I've been doing some research on my own, and I think Ryan might be having financial problems with his business. There have been several projects that he claimed were highly profitable, but I've noticed that our personal finances haven't reflected those successes. I'm wondering if he's been using personal funds to prop up the business, or if there are other financial issues I should know about." James's interest sharpened. "What kind of construction does his company do?" "Primarily residential developments and commercial renovations. He has about 20 employees and usually runs 3 or 4 projects simultaneously. The company has been growing steadily for the past 5 years, which is why I was surprised when he started talking about tightening our personal budget around the same time the affair started. I'll need access to business records if possible, corporate filings, tax returns, bank statements, anything you can get your hands on legally. This was where my plan had started to get complicated. Ryan kept all business documents in a safe in his home office, and he'd never shared the combination with me. But I'd been watching him enter it for years, and I'd finally worked up the courage to try opening it while he was at a construction site in Glendale the previous week. Inside the safe, I'd found not just business documents, but also a second phone I'd never seen before, additional credit cards in his name only, and bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed. The scope of Ryan's deception was far broader than just an extramarital affair. He'd been living a completely separate, financial life, one that suggested either massive business problems or systematic preparation for a life that didn't include me. I may be able to get access to some business records, I told James carefully, but I want to make sure anything I provide was obtained legally and can be used if this goes to court. James smiled for the first time during our meeting. You're thinking like someone who plans to win this thing. That's good. Too many people in your situation get so caught up in the emotional trauma that they make strategic mistakes. What's your timeline? Are you planning to confront your husband soon, or do you want to gather more information first? I'd been thinking about this question for weeks. My brother-in-law is getting married in May. It's going to be a big family event, and I don't want to disrupt that celebration with divorce proceedings. But I also don't want to wait too long and risk Ryan discovering what I'm doing or making moves to protect his assets. That gives us about 8 months to build a comprehensive case. It's enough time to do this right, to uncover everything there is to find and to position you for the best possible outcome when you're ready to move forward. As I left James's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not hope that my marriage could be saved. That ship had sailed the moment I'd seen Amanda's photos on Ryan's phone. But hope that I could emerge from this betrayal stronger and more independent than I'd been in years. Hope that I could protect my children and secure a future that didn't depend on a man who had proven himself unworthy of trust. The next several months passed in a surreal double life. During the day, I maintained the facade of devoted wife and mother. I attended Tyler's football games and Emma's academic competitions. I organized our annual holiday party and helped Ryan's mother plan Kevin's bachelor party. I smiled and laughed and played my role so convincingly that even Nicole, who knew about the affair, sometimes seemed surprised by how well I was handling the situation. But beneath the surface, I was building a case against my husband with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor. James's investigations revealed that the affair with Amanda was just the tip of the iceberg. Ryan had been systematically diverting money from his business accounts to fund his secret life, paying for hotel rooms and gifts and trips that weren't reflected in our family budget. He'd opened credit cards in his name only and was carrying significant debt that he'd hidden from me. More disturbing was what James discovered about Ryan's business practices. Several of his recent projects had significant cost overruns that Ryan had absorbed personally, rather than passing on to clients. He was bidding jobs at prices that barely covered materials and labor, apparently hoping to make up the difference through volume. The business was technically profitable on paper, but it was generating far less cash than it should have been, and Ryan had been covering the shortfall with personal loans and credit advances. Your husband is either spectacularly bad at business, management, or he's been moving money somewhere you can't see it, James reported during one of our monthly meetings. Either way, his financial situation is much more precarious than he's led you to believe. The revelation that our financial security was largely illusory was almost as devastating as discovering the affair. I'd spent years believing that Ryan's business success was providing stability for our family, that my own career was supplementary rather than essential. Learning that our comfortable lifestyle was built on debt and financial manipulation forced me to completely reevaluate everything, I thought I knew about our life together. That's when I made the decision to start rebuilding my own career with a seriousness I hadn't felt since before the children were born. I'd been working part-time as a marketing consultant for several small businesses, treating it more as a personal interest than a serious profession. But if I was going to be supporting myself and potentially contributing to my children's college expenses, I needed to position myself for financial independence. I started taking on larger projects, building relationships with bigger clients, and networking within Phoenix's business community with an intensity that surprised my colleagues. When my supervisor at the marketing firm offered me a full-time position with significantly more responsibility and compensation, I accepted immediately, despite Ryan's objections about the time commitment. "The kids need you available after school," he argued when I told him about the promotion, "and I'm going to need more support at home while the business is expanding." His resistance to my career advancement took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of what I now knew about his true situation. He wasn't worried about the children's well-being or his business expansion. He was worried about me becoming financially independent enough to leave him. By February, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of Ryan's betrayal that went far beyond simple adultery. James had documented dozens of meetings between Ryan and Amanda, tracked expenditures that showed a pattern of financial deception, and uncovered business practices that bordered on fraudulent. I had bank records, phone records, photographs, and testimony from witnesses who had seen them together at restaurants and hotels across the Phoenix metropolitan area. But I also had something else that Ryan couldn't have anticipated. I had time. 8 months to plan my strategy, to secure my finances, to prepare my children for the upheaval that was coming, and to position myself for a divorce proceeding where I would be the one controlling the narrative. The most difficult part of the entire process was maintaining my relationship with my children while keeping them unaware of what was happening. Emma had always been perceptive, and several times she asked if everything was okay between her father and me. Tyler was more focused on his senior year activities, but even he occasionally commented that Ryan seemed stressed and distracted. I handled their questions with carefully crafted honesty, acknowledging that parents sometimes go through difficult periods while reassuring them that they were loved and secure regardless of what might happen between Ryan and me. It was a delicate balance between preparation and protection, giving them enough information to feel safe without burdening them with adult problems they couldn't solve. Nicole remained my closest confidant throughout this period, providing both emotional support and practical advice about legal strategy. As an attorney, she couldn't officially represent me in divorce proceedings, but she helped me understand my rights and options in ways that proved invaluable when I finally hired my own divorce lawyer. "You've built an airtight case," she told me in April as we reviewed the evidence I'd accumulated. "Ryan's going to be completely blindsided when this comes out. He has no idea that you know about any of this, does he?" I shook my head. Ryan's confidence in his ability to deceive me had actually worked in my favor. He'd grown careless about covering his tracks, apparently convinced that I was too trusting or too naive to uncover his activities. His arrogance would prove to be his downfall. As Kevin's wedding approached, I felt the strange calm that comes with having prepared thoroughly for an inevitable confrontation. I'd secured my finances, documented Ryan's betrayal, positioned myself professionally, and prepared my children as much as possible for the changes that were coming. Everything was in place for the final act of this 8-month drama. I just hadn't expected Ryan to provide such a perfect opening by dancing with Amanda at his brother's wedding. His decision to flaunt their relationship in front of his entire family was either breathtakingly arrogant or catastrophically stupid. Either way, it was about to cost him everything he thought he'd been so cleverly protecting. The drive home from the Desert Rose Country Club felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Ryan sat in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference of someone who believed he'd successfully navigated a potentially awkward situation. He'd said goodbye to Amanda with what he probably thought was appropriate discretion, though their lingering embrace had been witnessed by half the remaining wedding guests. Emma and Tyler rode in the back seat in unusual silence. I could feel their tension through the rearview mirror, the weight of unasked questions filling the space between us. They'd both seen their father's behavior tonight, and while they didn't yet understand the full implications, they knew something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. "That was a beautiful wedding," I said conversationally as we pulled into our driveway in North Scottsdale. The house looked exactly the same as it had when we'd left earlier that evening, but everything felt different now. The carefully manicured desert landscaping, the oversized windows that showcased Ryan's success, the 3-car garage that housed his truck, my sedan, and Emma's car that we'd bought for her 16th birthday. All of it suddenly felt like stage props in a play that was about to end. "Kevin and Samantha looked so happy," Emma agreed, though her voice carried an undertone that suggested she was thinking about more than just the bride and groom. "It was nice seeing all the family together." Tyler remained quiet until we were inside the house. Then he turned to Ryan with the directness that had always characterized his personality. "Dad, who was that woman you were dancing with?" Ryan's casual mask slipped for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Amanda Cole. We went to college together. She's an old friend who happened to be in town for the wedding." "She seemed like more than just an old friend," Tyler said, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Don't be ridiculous," Ryan replied, but there was an edge to his tone that hadn't been there moments before. "I was just being polite. It's called having good manners, something you might consider practicing." The dismissive response was so typical of Ryan's recent interactions with the children that I felt my carefully maintained composure begin to crack. For 8 months, I'd watched him become increasingly irritable and distant with Tyler and Emma, obviously distracted by his double life, but taking out his stress on the family members who deserved it least. "Tyler's not being ridiculous," I said quietly. "Your behavior tonight was inappropriate and you know it." Ryan's head snapped toward me, his expression shifting from defensive to angry. "My behavior? I danced with an old friend at my brother's wedding. Since when is that a crime?" "Since you spent more time with her than you did with your own wife," I replied, my voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Since you abandoned our table during dinner to find her. Since you looked more comfortable with her than you have with me in months." The children were watching this exchange with growing alarm. Arguments between Ryan and me had become more frequent recently, though I'd tried to keep them away from the kids as much as possible. Tonight, however, the facade was crumbling in real time. "I think we should continue this conversation privately," Ryan said through gritted teeth, clearly aware that we had an audience. "I think we're past private conversations," I replied. "But you're right about one thing. Emma, Tyler, why don't you head upstairs? Your father and I need to talk." Emma hesitated, clearly torn between teenage self-preservation instincts and concern for what was about to unfold. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Go get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow if you want to." Tyler lingered a moment longer, his protective instincts warring with respect for adult boundaries. Finally, he followed his sister upstairs, but not before giving Ryan a look that clearly communicated his disapproval of the evening's events. Once we were alone, Ryan's mask fell away completely. "What the hell was that about? Since when do you challenge me in front of the kids? Since you decided to humiliate me in front of your entire family?" I shot back. "Did you really think no one would notice? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Ryan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing but now recognized as a manipulation tactic he used when he was buying time to construct a believable lie. "You're overreacting, Jessica. Amanda is going through a difficult time with her divorce, and I was just being supportive. There's nothing inappropriate about showing kindness to someone who's struggling." The lie was so smoothly delivered that I almost admired his technique. If I hadn't spent the last 8 months documenting his affair in exhaustive detail, I might have actually questioned my own perceptions. Instead, I found myself marveling at his ability to rewrite reality with such conviction. Amanda's divorce was finalized 18 months ago, I said calmly. And based on the way you two were touching each other tonight, I'd say she's moved on quite successfully. Something flickered in Ryan's eyes, a moment of uncertainty as he realized that I knew more than he'd expected. But he recovered quickly, falling back on the aggressive defensiveness that had become his go-to strategy whenever he felt cornered. You're being paranoid and jealous, and it's not attractive. Amanda and I are friends, period. If you can't handle me having normal social interactions with other people, that says more about your insecurities than it does about my behavior. There it was, the gaslighting technique he'd perfected over the course of our marriage. Take my legitimate concerns and twist them into evidence of my own psychological shortcomings. Make me question my perceptions, my judgment, my right to feel upset about obvious boundary violations. For years, this approach had worked. I'd apologized for being too sensitive, too demanding, too suspicious. I'd internalized his criticisms and modified my behavior to avoid future conflicts. But tonight, armed with 8 months of documented evidence and the support of professionals who had validated my perceptions, I felt immune to his manipulations. You're absolutely right, I said, surprising him with my sudden agreement. This conversation does say a lot about insecurities, just not mine. Before Ryan could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and felt a familiar surge of anticipation. The message was from Marcus Rivera, and it contained just 2 words, I'm ready. Marcus was the final piece of my strategy, the element that Ryan couldn't possibly have anticipated, because he'd been so focused on his own deceptions that he'd stopped paying attention to my life entirely. While Ryan had been conducting his affair with Amanda, I'd been building a relationship of my own. Not an affair in the traditional sense, but something far more significant and permanent. Marcus and I had met 6 months earlier during a marketing conference in Tempe. He was a successful architect specializing in sustainable commercial design, recently relocated to Phoenix from San Diego to open a Southwest branch of his firm. Our initial connection had been purely professional. He was looking for marketing support for his new business, and I was expanding my client base as part of my preparation for financial independence. But as we'd worked together over the months, our professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. Marcus was everything that Ryan had once been, but was no longer. Attentive, respectful, genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. He treated my career as important and valuable, rather than as a hobby that interfered with my real job of supporting his ambitions. More importantly, Marcus knew about Ryan's affair. I'd told him about my situation early in our relationship, needing to be completely honest about why I was still married while clearly developing feelings for another man. His response had been patient and understanding, offering support without pressure while making it clear that he was willing to wait for me to resolve my marriage on my own terms. The plan we'd developed together was audacious in its simplicity. While Ryan believed he was orchestrating his own timeline for leaving, I was actually controlling every aspect of when and how our marriage would end. And Marcus was going to help me do it in a way that would leave Ryan completely powerless to control the narrative. I need to make a phone call, I told Ryan, who was still processing my unexpected response to his accusations. At midnight? Jessica, we're in the middle of a serious conversation. No, we're not, I replied, moving toward the sliding door that led to our backyard patio. We're in the middle of you lying to me about an affair that I've known about for 8 months. The serious conversation is going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to be private. Ryan's face went white. What did you just say? But I was already stepping outside, closing the door behind me and leaving him alone with the implications of what I'd just revealed. The night air was cool and dry, carrying the scent of desert sage and the distant sounds of late-night traffic on the nearby freeway. I walked to the far end of our patio, where Ryan couldn't hear my conversation through the windows, and called Marcus. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "Exactly as we expected. He paraded her around like a trophy, made sure everyone saw them together, and then came home and tried to gaslight me about what I'd witnessed." "So he's definitely committed to the timeline we discussed?" "More than committed. He's accelerated it. Based on his behavior tonight, I think he's planning to ask for a divorce much sooner than we anticipated. Probably within the next few weeks." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Are you ready for that?" The question hung in the desert air between us. Was I ready to blow up my marriage, disrupt my children's lives, and leap into an uncertain future with a man I'd known for 6 months? Was I ready to reveal secrets that would devastate Ryan's family relationships and potentially destroy his business? Was I ready to transform from Jessica Martinez Thompson, suburban wife and mother, into something entirely new and unknown? "I've been ready for months," I said finally. "The question is whether you're still willing to be part of what comes next." "Jessica," Marcus said, his voice warm with the affection that had sustained me through the most difficult period of my life. "I married you 3 weeks ago. I'm not going anywhere." The marriage had been conducted in a simple civil ceremony in Sedona, witnessed only by Nicole and James Wilson, who had become far more than just my private investigator over the months we'd worked together. Legally, I was still married to Ryan, since I hadn't filed for divorce yet. But in every way that mattered, I had already moved on to a life that didn't include him. The decision to marry Marcus before divorcing Ryan had been strategic as well as emotional. Under Arizona's community property laws, any assets I acquired after my separation from Ryan would be considered separate property, not subject to division in our eventual divorce. By establishing a legal separation date and marrying Marcus immediately, afterward, I could protect the new life I was building from Ryan's inevitable attempts to claim part of it. More importantly, the marriage gave me something that Ryan's affair with Amanda couldn't provide him: the moral high ground. When the details of our respective relationships became public, I would be the wronged wife who had found love again, after her husband's betrayal. Ryan would be the cheating husband who had abandoned his family for his college girlfriend. "The children don't know yet," I told Marcus. I wanted to wait until after Kevin's wedding to avoid disrupting the family celebration. But after tonight, I think the timeline needs to move up. "Whatever you need," Marcus assured me. "My attorney is standing by, and we've already prepared all the necessary paperwork. We can move as quickly or as slowly as you're comfortable with." Through the patio doors, I could see Ryan pacing in our living room, clearly agitated by our interrupted conversation and my cryptic comments about knowing about his affair. He was probably trying to calculate how much I actually knew and whether he could still control the situation through his usual combination of charm and intimidation. He was about to discover that he'd lost that power months ago. "I need to go back inside and finish this conversation," I told Marcus. "But I want you to know that whatever happens over the next few days, I'm grateful for everything you've done to help me through this." "You don't need to thank me for loving you," Marcus replied simply. "That's the easy part. Tomorrow is when the real work begins." When I returned to the living room, Ryan was waiting with the focused intensity of someone who had finally realized he was in serious trouble. The casual arrogance he'd displayed earlier was gone, replaced by the calculating expression he wore when trying to solve complex business problems. "You said you've known about Amanda for 8 months, he began without preamble. "What exactly do you think you know?" The question was clearly intended to help him gauge how much damage control he needed to do. But I was past the point of playing games with him. "I know about the hotel rooms in Scottsdale, Sedona, and Flagstaff. I know about the jewelry you bought her that never made it home to me. I know about the business trips that were actually romantic getaways. I know about the second phone you keep in your office safe. I know about the credit cards you opened without telling me. I know about the money you've been diverting from the business to fund your affair. Ryan's face cycled through several emotions as I spoke: surprise, anger, fear, and finally, calculation. You hired someone to spy on me. I hired someone to document what you were already doing, I corrected. There's a difference. Jessica, Ryan said, his voice taking on the cajoling tone he used when he wanted something from me. I know. This looks bad, but we can work through this. Marriage counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Amanda doesn't mean anything to me. She was just a distraction, a mistake. You and the kids are what matter. The lie was so transparent that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. No, Ryan. We can't work through this. We're past that point, and we have been for a long time. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the revelation that would change everything between us forever. I mean that while you were planning your exit strategy with Amanda, I was building a new life without you. I mean that your affair gave me the freedom to finally admit that this marriage has been over for years. And I mean that I'm not going to be the abandoned wife trying to hold on to a man who doesn't want to be here. Ryan stared at me for a long moment, clearly struggling to process what I was telling him. Are you saying you're having an affair? Too? No, I replied calmly. I'm saying I'm already gone. The silence that followed my declaration stretched between us like a canyon. Ryan stood frozen in our living room, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, rage, and something that might have been panic. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, marking the official end of what had been the longest day of our marriage. What do you mean you're already gone? Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make my words more real than he was prepared to accept. I mean exactly what I said. While you were planning your future with Amanda, I was securing my own independence. The difference is that I was smart enough to do it legally and completely above board. Ryan began pacing again, his business mind clearly working to understand the implications of what I was telling him. Jessica, you're upset about tonight, and I understand that. But you're talking crazy. You can't just decide a marriage is over without discussing it. We have children, a home, shared finances. You can't just walk away from all of that. His assumption that I was acting impulsively, driven by the emotional trauma of discovering his affair, revealed just how little he actually knew about the woman he'd been married to for 12 years. Ryan had always seen me as someone who made decisions based on feelings rather than strategy. Someone who could be managed through the right combination of charm and dismissal. He was about to learn how catastrophically wrong he'd been. You're absolutely right about one thing, I said, settling into the armchair that had always been my favorite spot in the room. I can't just walk away from our shared obligations. That's why I've spent the last 8 months ensuring that when I do leave, everything will be handled properly and legally. The calm in my voice seemed to unnerve Ryan more than anger would have. He stopped pacing and focused on me with the intense attention he usually reserved for important business negotiations. What have you done, Jessica? I've protected myself and our children from the financial disaster you've been creating with your secret spending and questionable business practices. I've documented every aspect of your affair to ensure that any divorce proceedings will reflect the true cause of our marriage's breakdown. And I've established my own independent life so that I won't be dependent on your cooperation or generosity when this is over. Ryan's face flushed with anger. You had no right to investigate my private affairs or my business dealings. That's a violation of trust and probably illegal. The accusation was so hypocritical that I couldn't help but laugh. You're lecturing me about violations of trust? You've been sleeping with another woman for over a year, lying to me about your whereabouts, and using our family's money to finance your affair. But I'm the one who violated trust by finding out about it? That's different, and you know it. What I did was personal. What you're describing sounds like corporate espionage. What I did was protect myself from a husband who was systematically deceiving me about every important aspect of our life together. And before you start threatening legal action, you should know that everything I discovered was either found in plain sight or obtained through completely legal means by licensed professionals. Ryan's expression shifted as the implications of my words sank in. Licensed professionals? You hired investigators? Attorneys? I hired people who could help me understand the true scope of what you've been doing behind my back. And what we found was far worse than just an affair, Ryan. We found evidence of financial mismanagement that could destroy your business and our family's security. You're bluffing, Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. My business is solid. We've had our best year ever. Your business is hemorrhaging money, I replied calmly. You've been underbidding projects to maintain the appearance of success, then covering the losses with personal loans and credit advances. The Chandler residential development that you told me was so profitable? It actually lost money, and you've been using our personal savings to cover the shortfall without telling me? Ryan's face went pale. The Chandler project had been his pride and joy, a luxury housing development that he'd presented as proof of his company's growing success. Learning that I not only knew about the financial losses but had documented them clearly shook him more than any discussion of his affair could have. How could you possibly know about project finances? Those records are confidential. Confidential? From whom? I'm your wife, Ryan. Half of everything you own is legally mine, including your business interests. I had every right to understand our financial situation, especially when your behavior suggested that you might be planning to leave me. The mention of my legal rights seemed to trigger a new level of panic in Ryan. He moved to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a substantial glass of whiskey, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted it to his lips. What exactly are you planning to do with this information? That depends entirely on how you want to handle the dissolution of our marriage. If you're willing to be reasonable about asset division and custody arrangements, we can handle this quietly and privately. If you choose to be vindictive or try to hide assets, then everything I've discovered becomes relevant to divorce proceedings. Ryan drained his whiskey glass and immediately poured another. You said you've established an independent life. What does that mean? This was the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading for months. The moment when I would have to tell the father of my children that I'd not only discovered his betrayal, but had moved so far beyond it that reconciliation was impossible even if he wanted it. It means I've already moved on, Ryan. Emotionally, financially, and legally. Legally? Jessica, what the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that our marriage has been over for months, whether you realized it or not. I'm talking about the fact that I've found someone who treats me with the respect and consideration that you stopped showing me years ago. And I'm talking about the fact that I'm not going to spend another day pretending that this relationship is something it's not. Ryan set down his glass so hard that whiskey splashed onto the polished wood of our coffee table. Are you telling me you're having an affair? No, I'm telling you that I've fallen in love with someone who wants to build a life with me. Not just use me as a convenient accessory to his existing life. Someone who sees my career as important rather than as a hobby that interferes with his priorities. Someone who would never humiliate me in public the way you did tonight. Who is it? Ryan's voice was deadly quiet, and I could see the anger building behind his eyes. Is it someone I know? His name is Marcus Rivera, and no, you don't know him. He's an architect who relocated to Phoenix to expand his business. We met through work, and our relationship developed after I discovered your affair with Amanda. Ryan's face darkened with a rage I'd rarely seen before. How long has this been going on? 6 months, but unlike your situation with Amanda, I didn't lie to you about my whereabouts or use our family's money to finance secret meetings. I told you I was taking on more clients and working longer hours, which was true. I told you I was attending networking events and professional conferences, which was also true. The difference is that I used those opportunities to build a legitimate future for myself rather than to sneak around behind your back. 6 months, Ryan repeated, as if he couldn't quite process the timeline. "You've been planning this for 6 months?" "I've been planning to leave you since the day I found those photos on your phone. The relationship with Marcus happened because I was finally free to admit what I'd known for years, but had been afraid to acknowledge." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that our marriage has been dead for a long time, Ryan. It means that I've been going through the motions of being your wife while you've been going through the motions of being my husband, and neither of us has been happy or fulfilled in years. Your affair with Amanda wasn't the cause of our problems. It was just the symptom that finally forced me to admit what I should have acknowledged long ago." Ryan began pacing again, his mind clearly racing to understand how completely his assumptions about our relationship had been wrong. "The kids, Jessica. What about Emma and Tyler? You can't just blow up their family because you've decided you're not happy." The mention of our children hit exactly the nerve Ryan had intended, but not in the way he'd hoped. Instead of guilt or uncertainty, I felt a surge of protective anger that had been building for months. "Don't you dare lecture me about protecting our children," I said, my voice rising for the first time during our conversation. "You're the one who chose to conduct an affair that required lying to them constantly about your whereabouts. You're the one who brought your mistress to your brother's wedding and forced them to watch you humiliate their mother in public. You're the one whose financial recklessness is threatening their college funds and their security. That's not fair, and you know it. My relationship with Amanda has nothing to do with my feelings for Emma and Tyler. Your relationship with Amanda has everything to do with your feelings for Emma and Tyler, because it demonstrates that your own immediate gratification is more important to you than their emotional well-being. Do you think they haven't noticed how distant and irritable you've become over the past year? Do you think they haven't wondered why you're always on your phone, always leaving for mysterious meetings, always making excuses to avoid family activities?" Ryan's defensive anger faltered slightly as he considered the accuracy of my observations. He had become increasingly absent from family life as his affair intensified, missing Tyler's football games and Emma's academic competitions, declining to participate in family traditions that had once been important to him. "I can change," he said finally. "I can end things with Amanda and focus on rebuilding our family. Jessica, please. We can get counseling, take a vacation together, whatever you want. Just don't throw away 12 years of marriage without at least trying to save it." The plea in his voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the sympathy that had sustained our relationship through previous difficulties. But then I remembered the photos on his phone, the receipts for gifts I'd never received, the elaborate lies he'd constructed to cover his absences. I remembered years of feeling like a supporting character in my own life, valued primarily for my ability to facilitate his success, rather than for my own dreams and ambitions. It's too late for that, Ryan. Even if I believed you could change, even if I thought we could somehow rebuild trust after everything that's happened, it wouldn't matter. I don't want to save our marriage anymore. I want to end it. Because of him. Because of this Marcus person. Because of me, I corrected firmly. Because I've remembered who I was before I became your wife, and I've realized that I can be that person again. Because I've discovered what it feels like to be with someone who truly values and respects me. Because our children deserve to see what a healthy relationship looks like. And they're not going to learn that by watching us pretend to be happy while we slowly destroy each other. Ryan stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You're really serious about this? You've already made up your mind? I made up my mind 8 months ago when I found evidence of your affair. Everything since then has just been preparation for this conversation. What happens now? Now we tell our children that their parents are getting divorced. We work out custody arrangements that prioritize their needs over our own convenience. We divide our assets fairly and legally, and we both move on to lives that make us happier than we've been in years. Ryan refilled his whiskey glass for the third time, his movements mechanical and defeated. The kids are going to hate me. That depends entirely on how you handle the next few weeks and months. If you take responsibility for your choices and focus on being the best father you can be during this transition, they'll respect you for it eventually. If you try to blame me for the breakdown of our marriage or make them choose sides, then yes, they probably will resent you. And if I contest the divorce? If I fight you on custody or asset division? The threat was delivered, without conviction, but I treated it seriously anyway. Then everything I've discovered about your affair and your business practices becomes public record. Then Emma and Tyler learn all the details about why their family is falling apart, instead of just the basic fact that their parents are no longer compatible. Then your business partners and clients get to read about your financial management issues in court documents. Is that really the path you want to choose? Ryan's shoulders sagged as the full scope of his situation became clear to him. He'd been outmaneuvered completely, not through any malicious strategy on my part, but simply because I'd taken his betrayal seriously enough to prepare for its inevitable consequences. When are you planning to tell the kids? Tomorrow. I think they deserve to hear the truth as soon as possible, so they can start processing what this means for their lives. Together? Or are you planning to tell them alone? That's up to you. If you want to be part of the conversation, if you're ready to take responsibility for your role in this situation, then we can tell them together. If you're going to try to minimize your affair or blame me for our problems, then I'd prefer to handle it myself. Ryan finished his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. I need time to think about all of this. This is happening so fast. This has been happening for 8 months, Ryan. The only thing that's fast is your realization that I've been taking it seriously. What about tonight? Do you want me to sleep in the guest room? I want you to do whatever feels appropriate to you. But understand that regardless of where you sleep, our marriage is over. Nothing that happens between now and when we file the divorce papers is going to change that. Ryan nodded slowly, the fight finally going out of him completely. I never meant for any of this to happen, Jessica. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. I know, I said, and for the first time in our conversation, I felt genuine sadness rather than anger. But intentions don't always align with outcomes. And the outcome is that we're both going to have to figure out how to build new lives from the wreckage of this one. As Ryan headed upstairs to what I assumed would be a sleepless night in the guest room, I remained in the living room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that was ending. Family photos on the mantel, vacation souvenirs on the bookshelf, artwork that Emma had created in elementary school still hanging on the refrigerator in the nearby kitchen. All of it would have to be sorted through, divided up, or simply left behind as we created separate households for our children to navigate. But, beneath the sadness of endings, I felt something else. Relief. The exhausting work of maintaining a facade was finally over. The careful calculations required to protect myself while preparing for this moment were complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we began the process of untangling 12 years of shared life. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, I could simply be honest about where I stood and what I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did it go? It's done, I typed back. He knows everything now. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? I was about to become a divorced single mother, navigating co-parenting with a man who had betrayed my trust. I was facing the challenge of explaining to my teenage children why their family was falling apart. I was about to embark on a new marriage, with someone I'd known for only 6 months, gambling my future on a relationship that had developed under extraordinary circumstances. But I was also free from the exhausting work of trying to save a marriage that had been slowly dying for years. I was finally able to pursue my own career goals without having to justify them to someone who saw them as secondary to his own ambitions. I was in love with a man who treated me as an equal partner, rather than as a convenient accessory to his existing life. Yes, I typed back to Marcus. For the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The morning after my confrontation with Ryan arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. I woke up in what had been our shared bedroom, though Ryan had chosen to spend the night in the guest room downstairs. The house felt different, charged with the electricity of truth finally spoken and secrets finally revealed. Outside my window, the Arizona sun was painting the Sonoran Desert in shades of gold and amber, promising another scorching day in what was turning out to be an unusually hot May. I could hear movement in the kitchen below, the familiar sounds of Ryan making his morning coffee and probably trying to process everything that had transpired between us just hours earlier. There was a part of me that felt sorry for him, watching his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. But mostly, I felt the profound relief that comes from no longer having to pretend that everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Emma, who had apparently woken up early and noticed that her father's truck was still in the driveway despite the fact that he usually left for construction sites before dawn. There were also text messages from Tyler asking if everything was okay, and one from Marcus simply saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Rivera," with a heart emoji that made me smile despite the gravity of the situation I was facing. Mrs. Rivera. The name still felt foreign and thrilling at the same time. For 3 weeks now, I had been legally married to Marcus Rivera, while still living as Jessica Thompson, in a house that represented everything I was leaving behind. It was a strange kind of double life, but one that had given me the strength and security I needed to finally end my marriage to Ryan on my own terms. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple but professional outfit that would serve me well for what I knew would be a day full of difficult conversations. The woman looking back at me from the bathroom mirror seemed older than she had just 24 hours earlier, but also more alive, more present, more authentically herself than she'd been in years. Downstairs, Ryan was sitting at our kitchen island staring into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. He looked up when I entered the room, and I was struck by how much he'd aged overnight. The confidence and swagger that had always been his defining characteristics were nowhere to be found, replaced by the hollow-eyed confusion of someone who had suddenly discovered that his entire understanding of reality was incorrect. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd already made. It was a small gesture, but one that maintained the civility I hoped we could preserve for our children's sake. "Jessica," he began, his voice hoarse from what I assumed had been a sleepless night. "I've been thinking about everything you said last night, and I need to ask you something directly." I waited, giving him space to formulate whatever question was weighing on him. "This man, Marcus, are you actually in love with him? Or is this just your way of getting revenge for what I did with Amanda?" The question revealed so much about how Ryan saw the world and relationships in general. In his mind, love was strategic, a tool to be used for advantage rather than a genuine emotion that could transform someone's entire perspective on life. He couldn't conceive of the possibility that I might have genuinely found something better than what we had shared, so he was looking for ulterior motives that would make more sense to him. "I'm in love with him," I said simply. "Not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because he's an extraordinary man who sees me as a complete person rather than as an accessory to his own ambitions. Because he makes me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Because when I'm with him, I remember who I was before I became so focused on being the perfect wife that I lost track of being myself." Ryan winced at my words, but he didn't try to argue with them. "How can you be sure it's real? You've only known him for 6 months, and you were dealing with a lot of emotional stress when you met him. How do you know you're not just substituting one relationship for another without really processing what went wrong between us?" It was actually a fair question, one that I'd asked myself many times during the development of my relationship with Marcus. The answer had become clearer over time, as I'd observed the fundamental differences between how Marcus treated me and how Ryan had been treating me for years. I know it's real because of how he responds when I talk about my work, my goals, my opinions about things that matter to me. He listens like what I'm saying actually interests him, rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. I know it's real because he encourages me to pursue opportunities that might require sacrifice from him, rather than dismissing them as inconvenient to our shared life. I know it's real because when we disagree about something, he tries to understand my perspective rather than just trying to convince me that his perspective is superior. Ryan's face tightened as I spoke, clearly recognizing behaviors in my description that he knew he'd been guilty of throughout our marriage. That doesn't mean what we had wasn't real, too, at least in the beginning. You're right, I agreed. What we had was real, especially in those first few years. But people change, Ryan. Priorities shift, dreams evolve, and sometimes two people who were perfect for each other at one stage of life grow into people who are fundamentally incompatible. That's what happened to us, long before either Amanda or Marcus entered the picture. Before Ryan could respond, we heard footsteps on the stairs, followed by Emma's voice calling out that she was going to grab breakfast before heading to school. I exchanged a look with Ryan, both of us realizing that the conversation we'd been avoiding was about to become unavoidable. Emma appeared in the kitchen dressed for school but moving with the cautious awareness of someone who sensed that something significant had shifted in her environment. At 16, she possessed the emotional intelligence that often comes with being the daughter of parents whose marriage has been quietly deteriorating for years. "Morning, Mom. Morning, Dad." She moved to the refrigerator and began assembling ingredients for her usual breakfast smoothie, but I could tell she was paying close attention to the atmosphere in the room. "Everything okay? You both seem kind of intense this morning." Tyler appeared moments later, looking less observant but equally aware that something was different. At 18, he'd developed the teenage boy's talent for sensing family drama while simultaneously trying to avoid being drawn into it. "Actually," I said, glancing at Ryan to see if he was ready for this conversation, "we need to talk to both of you about something important. Do you have a few minutes before school?" Emma's smoothie making stopped abruptly. Tyler, who had been reaching for cereal in the pantry, turned around with the alert expression of someone who had just realized he was about to receive news that would change his life. "Is this about last night?" Emma asked quietly. "About Dad and that woman at the wedding?" The directness of her question surprised both Ryan and me. We'd assumed that our children had noticed his behavior, but hadn't fully understood its implications. Emma's question suggested that she'd been far more aware of the undercurrents in our family than we'd realized. "Partly," I admitted. "But it's about more than just last night. Your dad and I have been having some serious problems in our marriage for a while now, and we've decided that it's time to separate." The word separate hung in the air like a physical presence. Tyler sank into one of the kitchen chairs, while Emma leaned against the counter as if she needed the support to remain upright. "Are you getting divorced?" Tyler asked, his voice carefully controlled, but his eyes reflecting the kind of fear that comes with watching your fundamental assumptions about family stability crumble in real time. "Yes," Ryan said, speaking for the first time since our children had joined us. "We are, and I want you both to know that this is not your fault in any way. This is about problems between your mother and me that we haven't been able to resolve." Emma's eyes moved between Ryan and me, clearly trying to process not just the fact of our impending divorce, but also the dynamics that had led to this moment. "Is it because of that woman last night? Amanda?" Ryan's face flushed, but he maintained eye contact with his daughter. "My relationship with Amanda is part of what's caused problems between your mother and me, yes. But the issues in our marriage go deeper than that." "How long has this been going on?" Tyler asked, and I could hear the anger beginning to build in his voice. "How long have you been lying to us about everything being fine?" It was exactly the question I'd been dreading, because there was no good answer that wouldn't make one or both of their parents look like they'd been manipulating their children for months. "I've known about your father's relationship with Amanda, for about 8 months, I said carefully. During that time, I've been trying to figure out the best way to handle the situation while protecting both of you from unnecessary stress and disruption. 8 months? Emma's voice was sharp with disbelief. You've known about this for 8 months and you didn't tell us? We've been living in this house, acting like we're a normal family, while you both knew it was all fake? The accusation hit exactly the guilt that I'd been carrying throughout this entire process. How do you balance protecting your children from adult problems with preparing them for the reality that their family is about to change dramatically? How do you maintain stability while secretly planning to dismantle the life they've always known? It wasn't fake, Ryan said defensively. Our love for you and our commitment to being good parents has always been real, regardless of what was happening between your mother and me. But you lied to us, Tyler pointed out with the logical precision that had always characterized his thinking. Every day for 8 months, you both pretended that everything was normal when you knew it wasn't. How is that not fake? I could see that this conversation was heading in a direction that would only increase the kids' sense of betrayal and confusion. It was time to shift focus from the timeline of our deception to the practical realities of what would happen next. You're both right to feel angry about the way we've handled this, I said. Your father and I made decisions about how and when to tell you that we're focused on protecting you, but we understand that it feels like we were lying to you instead. We're sorry about that, and we'll both do better about being honest with you going forward. What does that mean exactly? Emma asked. What happens now? Ryan and I looked at each other, both realizing that we hadn't actually discussed the practical details of how our separation would work. We'd been so focused on the emotional and legal aspects of ending our marriage that we hadn't worked out the logistics of how 2 households would function. Your father and I are still working out the details, I admitted, but our priority is making sure that both of you feel secure and supported during this transition. You'll have homes with both of us, and we'll work together to make sure your school, activities, and social lives are disrupted as little as possible. Where are you going to live? Tyler asked, directing his question to me with the assumption that Ryan would remain in the family home. This was the moment I'd been most nervous about, because it involved revealing just how thoroughly I'd planned for this transition without their knowledge. I've already found a place downtown, I said carefully. It's a loft in the arts district, with enough space for both of you to have your own rooms when you're staying with me. Emma's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. You already have a place? How is that possible if you just decided to separate? I didn't just decide to separate, sweetheart. I've been planning for this possibility for several months, making sure that I could provide a stable home for you and your brother regardless of what happened between your father and me. Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. This is unbelievable. You've both been planning your escape routes while we've been living here thinking we had a normal family. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? Before I could respond, Tyler stormed out of the kitchen and up the stairs, his footsteps heavy with anger and hurt. Moments later, we heard his bedroom door slam with enough force to rattle the pictures on the nearby wall. Emma remained in the kitchen, but her expression had hardened into something that reminded me painfully of my own face when I'd first discovered Ryan's betrayal. There's something else, isn't there? She said, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp with suspicion. Something you're still not telling us. Ryan and I exchanged another look, both of us realizing that Emma's intuition was leading her toward the revelation that would be hardest for our children to understand and accept. What makes you think that? I asked, buying time while I tried to figure out how to explain the existence of Marcus in a way that wouldn't make me sound like a hypocrite for criticizing Ryan's affair. Because you're both acting like there are still secrets. Because Mom looks different today, like she's relieved about something instead of just sad. Because this whole conversation feels rehearsed, like you've both been practicing what you were going to say. Emma's perceptiveness was both impressive and terrifying. At 16, she was already developing the kind of emotional intelligence that would serve her well in life, but that made it nearly impossible to hide anything from her. "There is something else," I admitted. "But it's complicated, and I want to make sure you understand the timeline and context before you make judgments about anyone's behavior. Just tell me, Mom. I'm not a little kid anymore." I took a deep breath and made the decision to trust my daughter with the complete truth. While I was preparing for the possibility of divorce, I met someone. His name is Marcus Rivera, and he's become very important to me. Our relationship developed after I discovered your father's affair, and it's part of why I'm confident that ending this marriage is the right decision for everyone involved. Emma stared at me for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of what I'd just told her. "Are you saying you're dating someone?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with someone who treats me with respect and kindness, and who has helped me remember what healthy relationships look like." While you were still married to Dad?" The question contained an accusation that I couldn't entirely deny, even though the circumstances were far more complex than Emma could understand, without knowing the full scope of Ryan's betrayal and deception. "Yes," I said simply. "While I was still legally married to your father, but after I'd discovered that he was having an affair and had decided that our marriage was over." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like disappointment. "So you both cheated. You're both liars." "It's not that simple, Emma." "It sounds pretty simple to me. Dad was cheating with Amanda, so you decided to cheat with someone else. Now you're both leaving your marriage for other people, and Tyler and I are supposed to just accept that as normal." Ryan spoke up for the first time since Emma had started questioning me. "Your mother's situation is different from mine, Emma. I was having an affair while trying to maintain our marriage. Your mother developed a relationship with someone after she'd already decided that our marriage was over." "But she was still married to you," Emma pointed out with the kind of logical clarity that was impossible to argue with. "She was still living in this house, still pretending to be your wife, still lying to Tyler and me about what was really happening." The conversation was spiraling into exactly the kind of moral complexity that I'd hoped to avoid by timing the revelation of my relationship with Marcus more carefully. But Emma's questions were forcing me to confront the ethical gray areas of my own choices in ways that were uncomfortable but probably necessary. "You're right," I said finally. "I did develop feelings for someone else while I was still legally married to your father, and I should have been more honest with all of you about what that meant for our family. I made choices that prioritized my own emotional needs over complete transparency with you and Tyler, and I understand why that feels like a betrayal." Emma nodded slowly, and I could see her working through the implications of everything she'd learned in the past 20 minutes. "Is it serious? This relationship with Marcus?" This was the moment I'd been most nervous about. The revelation that would either demonstrate my commitment to building a stable future for my children or convince them that I'd completely lost perspective on what was important. "Yes," I said. "It's very serious. In fact, we were married 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed my announcement was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room and the distant sound of traffic on the nearby freeway. Emma's face cycled through several expressions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance that suggested she was beginning to understand just how thoroughly her parents' marriage had deteriorated. "You're already married to someone else?" she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Legally, yes, but only after I'd filed for separation from your father. I would never have taken that step while I was still committed to trying to save this marriage." "Does Tyler know?" "Not yet. I was hoping to tell you both together, but he's understandably upset right now." Emma sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking much younger than her 16 years. "This is so messed up, Mom. Do you understand how messed up this is? Yesterday we were a normal family going to Uncle Kevin's wedding. Today you're telling me that you're married to someone I've never met, and that everything I thought I knew about our family was wrong. The pain in her voice broke my heart, but I also recognized that this conversation was necessary for her to begin processing the reality of what our family was becoming. Emma was smart enough to understand that pretending everything was fine would only delay the inevitable reckoning with truth. I know it's overwhelming, I said, and I know it probably feels like your father and I have turned your whole world upside down without warning. But I want you to understand that everything we've done has been focused on trying to minimize the disruption to your and Tyler's lives. By lying to us for months? By trying to handle the adult problems between your father and me without forcing you to worry about things you couldn't control or fix. Ryan, who had been largely silent during this exchange, finally spoke up again. Emma, I know you're angry with both of us right now, and you have every right to be. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens between your mother and me, both of us love you and Tyler more than anything else in the world. This divorce doesn't change that. Emma looked between Ryan and me with an expression that suggested she was trying to figure out whether she could trust anything either of us said going forward. What happens now? With school, with graduation, with Tyler going to college in the fall? Nothing changes with any of those things, I assured her. Your father and I will both be at every important event in your lives. We'll both support you financially and emotionally. We'll coordinate our schedules to make sure one of us is always available when you need us. The only thing that's changing is that we won't be living in the same house anymore. And I'll have to meet this Marcus person, I assume. The reluctance in her voice was understandable, but I could also hear a kind of resigned curiosity that suggested she was beginning to accept the inevitability of our new family structure. When you're ready, I said. There's no pressure for you to have a relationship with Marcus beyond whatever feels comfortable to you. He understands that you and Tyler are the most important people in my life, and he's committed to supporting our family in whatever way works best for everyone. Emma nodded slowly, though her expression suggested she was far from convinced about any of this. I should probably go tell Tyler what you just told me. He's going to lose his mind when he finds out you're already married to someone else. Would you like me to talk to him? I think he needs to hear it from both of us, but maybe give him a few minutes to calm down first. As Emma headed upstairs to check on her brother, Ryan and I were left alone in the kitchen to contemplate the magnitude of what we'd just put our children through. The conversation had gone about as well as could be expected, given the complexity of the information we'd dumped on them, but I could see the guilt and regret weighing heavily on both of us. They're going to need counseling, Ryan said finally. Individual and family counseling to help them process all of this. I've already researched therapists who specialize in helping teenagers navigate divorce, I replied. Dr. Sarah Martinez came highly recommended, and she has experience with complex family situations. Ryan looked at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with frustration. You really have thought of everything, haven't you? I've tried to anticipate the challenges we'd face and prepare for them as much as possible. It seemed like the responsible thing to do. And Marcus? What's his role in all of this going to be? It was a fair question, and one that Marcus and I had discussed extensively as we'd planned for this moment. He'll be my husband and my partner, but he understands that my children come first. He's not trying to replace you as their father, and he's committed to supporting whatever custody and co-parenting arrangements work best for Emma and Tyler. I'd like to meet him, Ryan said, surprising me with the request. Not because I have any right to approve of your choices, but because he's going to be part of my children's lives. I think it would be better if we could establish some kind of civil relationship from the beginning. The maturity of Ryan's request gave me hope that we might be able to navigate the complexities of co-parenting without the acrimony that often characterizes high-conflict divorces. I think that's a great idea. Marcus has said the same thing about wanting to meet you, Before we could continue the conversation, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Nicole's name, and I realized that she was probably calling to check on how the confrontation with Ryan had gone. "I should take this," I told Ryan. "It's Nicole." "Jessica, how are you holding up?" Nicole's voice was warm with concern and anticipation. "We told the kids this morning," I said, stepping out onto the patio where I could speak more privately. "It was about as difficult as we'd expected, but they're processing it." "And Ryan? How did he handle everything after you talked last night?" "Better than I'd anticipated, actually. He's hurt and angry, but he's not being vindictive or trying to make things more difficult than they have to be." "That's something, at least. What's next?" "Filing the divorce papers, working out custody arrangements, and helping Emma and Tyler adjust to the idea that their family is going to look very different from now on." "And Marcus?" The mention of my new husband's name brought a smile to my face despite the stress of the morning. He's been incredible through all of this. Patient, supportive, understanding about how complicated everything is right now. "I'm proud of you, Jessica. I know this has been the hardest thing you've ever done, but you've handled it with such strength and grace." After I hung up with Nicole, I remained on the patio for a few minutes, looking out at the desert landscape that had been my view for the past 12 years. By this time next month, I'd be waking up to a completely different view from my downtown loft, beginning each day as Jessica Rivera instead of Jessica Thompson, building a life that prioritized my own happiness alongside my responsibilities as a mother. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For so many years, I'd defined myself primarily through my relationships with other people: wife, mother, daughter-in-law, community volunteer. Those roles would still be important, parts of who I was, but they would no longer be the totality of my identity. Marcus had helped me remember that I was also an intelligent professional with my own goals and ambitions. I was a woman who enjoyed art and literature and travel. I was someone who had opinions about politics and social issues that went beyond how they might affect my family's immediate interests. I was a person who deserved to be loved for who I actually was, rather than for how well I could support someone else's dreams. When I returned to the kitchen, Ryan was gone, probably retreating to his home office to begin making the phone calls that would start the process of untangling our shared life. I could hear voices from upstairs as Emma explained the morning's revelations to Tyler, their conversation punctuated by expressions of disbelief and anger that carried clearly through the house. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thinking of you today. Remember that you're braver than you believe and stronger than you know." The message reminded me that regardless of how difficult the next few months would be, I wasn't facing them alone. I had Marcus's love and support, Nicole's friendship and legal expertise, and my own hard-won confidence that I could build a life that made me genuinely happy. Tyler appeared in the kitchen about an hour later, his anger from earlier replaced by a kind of exhausted resignation. Emma told me about Marcus. I imagine that was a lot to process on top of everything else we discussed this morning. Yeah, it was. Tyler sat down across from me at the kitchen island, his expression serious but no longer hostile. "Can I ask you something, and will you give me a completely honest answer?" "Of course." "Do you love him? Like, really love him? Or is this just about getting back at Dad for what he did?" It was essentially the same question Ryan had asked me that morning, but coming from Tyler, it carried different weight. This wasn't about my motivations for ending my marriage. This was about whether my son could trust that I was making decisions based on genuine feelings rather than vindictive impulses. "I really love him," I said simply. "He makes me laugh. He challenges me intellectually. He supports my career goals, and he treats me like an equal partner in our relationship. When I'm with him, I feel like the best version of myself." Tyler considered this for a moment. "And you think you can trust him? After what Dad did, how can you be sure that Marcus won't hurt you the same way?" The question revealed the depth of Tyler's concern for my well-being and I felt a surge of gratitude for the young man he was becoming. Despite his anger about the disruption to our family, he was worried about my emotional safety in ways that demonstrated remarkable maturity. I can't be absolutely certain about anything, I admitted. But Marcus has been completely transparent with me about his past relationships, his financial situation, his goals for the future. He's shown me through his actions that he values honesty and communication. And honestly, after everything I've learned about protecting myself during this divorce process, I'm much better equipped to recognize warning signs and maintain my independence. When do we get to meet him? Whenever you're ready. There's no rush and no pressure for you to have any particular kind of relationship with him beyond whatever feels natural to you. Tyler nodded slowly. I think I'd rather meet him sooner than later. If he's going to be part of our lives, I want to know who he is and what he's about. The straightforward practicality of Tyler's approach reminded me of the qualities I most admired in my son. He wasn't going to waste energy on resentment or resistance that wouldn't change the reality of our situation. Instead, he was focusing on gathering the information he needed to adapt to our new family structure. I'll talk to Marcus about setting up a time for all of us to have dinner together, I promised. Somewhere neutral, relaxed, where you and Emma can ask him whatever questions you want. And Dad? Is he going to keep seeing Amanda? I honestly don't know. That's something you'd have to ask him directly. Tyler's expression darkened slightly. I don't really want to ask him about his girlfriend. It's weird and gross, and I'm still pretty angry with him about the whole thing. That's understandable. You don't have to have conversations you're not ready for. But I probably should eventually, right? If I'm going to have a relationship with Dad going forward, I'll have to deal with Amanda being part of his life. The wisdom in Tyler's observations struck me as remarkable for an 18-year-old who had just learned that his parents were divorcing. He was already thinking through the long-term implications of our family's restructuring and considering how to maintain important relationships despite his anger and disappointment. There's no timeline for any of this, I assured him. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with your father and what boundaries you need around his personal life. The same goes for your relationship with Marcus and me. You're in control of how much or how little you want to be involved in the details of our adult relationships. Emma joined us in the kitchen, looking like she'd been crying, but also more composed than she'd been during our earlier conversation. I've been thinking about everything you told us this morning, she said, settling into the chair next to Tyler. And I have some questions. Okay. What would you like to know? First, are you happy? Like, genuinely happy about the way things are turning out? The question caught me off guard with its directness and its focus on my emotional well-being, rather than on the practical implications of our family's changes. Yes, I said, realizing as I spoke that it was completely true. For the first time in years, I'm excited about my future instead of just going through the motions of my daily life. That doesn't mean I'm not sad about the end of my marriage to your father, or guilty about the disruption this is causing for you and Tyler. But yes, I'm happy about the possibility of building a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. Emma nodded as if my answer confirmed something she'd suspected. Second question, are you going to change? Like, are you going to become a different person now that you're married to Marcus? I hope I'm going to become more myself, I replied. More confident, more willing to pursue my own goals, more honest about what I want and need from relationships. But the things about me that you love, the things that make me your mother, those aren't going to change. And last question, are you going to have more kids? The question surprised me. Partly because Emma and Tyler were both old enough that the possibility of additional siblings seemed unlikely, but also because it suggested that Emma was thinking seriously about what our new family structure might look like in the long term. Marcus and I have talked about that, I said carefully. We've decided that our focus should be on building strong relationships with you and Tyler before we consider expanding our family. We're both committed to making sure you feel secure and prioritized during this transition." Emma and Tyler exchanged a look that suggested they'd discussed this possibility during their conversation upstairs. "So that's not completely off the table?" "It's not an immediate priority," I clarified, "but we haven't ruled it out entirely for the future." Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the intense concentration he usually reserved for complex math problems. "You know what's weird? You look different today, like happier and more relaxed than you've looked in a long time." His observation echoed what Nicole had noticed, and what I'd seen in my own reflection that morning. The stress of maintaining secrets and managing a failing marriage had taken a physical toll that I was only now beginning to recognize as it lifted. "I feel different," I admitted. "Scared about some things, but also relieved to finally be honest about what's been happening in our family." "Are you going to keep your job at the marketing firm?" Emma asked. "Actually, I'm expanding my role. There. I've been promoted to senior director, and I'll be managing several major client accounts. It's work that I'm passionate about, and it'll give me the financial independence I need to provide a good home for both of you." Emma smiled for the first time since our conversation began. "That's awesome, Mom. I know you've always been frustrated that Dad didn't take your work seriously." The casual way she acknowledged the dynamic that had been causing tension in my marriage for years suggested that both of my children had been more aware of the undercurrents in our family than Ryan and I had realized. It made me wonder what other aspects of our relationship problems had been obvious to them while remaining unspoken. "What about college?" Tyler asked, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Are you and Dad still going to be able to help me with tuition and expenses?" "Absolutely," I assured him. "Nothing about our divorce changes our commitment to supporting your education. We may have to coordinate our contributions differently, but you don't need to worry about whether you'll be able to afford school." "And Emma's college plans? I know she's looking at some expensive private schools." "Same answer. Your father and I will work together to make sure both of you have the educational opportunities you want and deserve." The relief on both of their faces reminded me of how much stress they'd been carrying about the potential financial implications of our family's dissolution. It was another reminder that children often worry about practical considerations that their parents assume they're too young to understand. "When are you moving out?" Emma asked. "This weekend. I want to get settled in the new place quickly, so that you can both see your rooms and start getting comfortable with the idea of spending time there." "Can we help you move?" The offer surprised me, but it also felt like a small indication that Emma was beginning to accept the reality of our new living arrangements. "I'd love that," I said. "And Marcus will be there too, so it would be a natural opportunity for you to meet him if you're ready." Tyler and Emma looked at each other again, communicating in the wordless way that siblings often develop. "Yeah," Tyler said finally. "Let's do that. Better to get it over with than to keep worrying about it." As the morning progressed into afternoon, the practical realities of dissolving a 12-year marriage began to assert themselves. Ryan emerged from his home office with a list of questions about asset division, custody schedules, and the timeline for various legal proceedings. We spent several hours going through financial documents, discussing the fate of our shared possessions, and trying to create a framework for co-parenting that would minimize conflict and confusion for the children. The conversation was surprisingly civil, marked more by sadness and mutual regret than by anger or recrimination. We were both exhausted by the emotional intensity of the past 24 hours, and perhaps that exhaustion was actually helpful in keeping us focused on practical solutions rather than on assigning blame. "I keep thinking about Kevin and Samantha," Ryan said at one point as we reviewed our joint bank account statements. "How their perfect wedding day got overshadowed by our family drama." "They'll understand," I replied. "And honestly, your behavior at the reception would have caused problems whether I was prepared for it or not. At least this way, the fallout is contained to our immediate family, rather than spreading throughout the extended family through gossip and speculation. Ryan nodded, though I could see that he was still struggling with guilt about the timing and public nature of his display with Amanda. I should call Kevin and apologize. We both should. They deserve to know what's happening directly from us rather than hearing it secondhand from your mother or other family members. As afternoon faded into evening, Marcus arrived as we'd planned earlier in the day. I'd texted him during one of our breaks from financial discussions to let him know that Emma and Tyler were ready to meet him, and he'd rearranged his schedule to join us for dinner. I watched through the front window as he parked his car in our driveway, taking a moment to compose himself before walking to the door. Marcus understood the significance of this meeting, not just for my children, but for our future as a family. Everything about our relationship had developed in private, away from the complexities of my existing family life. Now, for the first time, those two worlds were about to collide. When I opened the door, Marcus smiled with the warmth that had first attracted me to him, but I could see the nervous energy underneath his calm exterior. He was dressed casually but carefully, in khakis and a button-down shirt that struck the right balance between respect for the occasion and accessibility for teenagers who were probably already inclined to view him with suspicion. "Hi," he said, simply, leaning in to kiss my cheek in a gesture that was affectionate but appropriately restrained given our audience. "Hi yourself," I replied, feeling the familiar flutter of happiness that his presence always brought me, even in stressful circumstances. Emma and Tyler had positioned themselves in the living room where they could observe Marcus's arrival without having to immediately engage in conversation. I could see them studying him through the doorway, taking in details about his appearance, his mannerisms, the way he interacted with me. "Emma, Tyler," I called, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Rivera." Marcus approached them with confidence, but without the overeager enthusiasm that might have felt threatening or fake. He offered his hand to Tyler first, meeting his eyes directly and waiting for Tyler to decide whether to accept the gesture. "Tyler, right?" Marcus said as they shook hands. "Your mom talks about you all the time. Congratulations on getting into Arizona State." "Thanks," Tyler replied, his tone neutral but not hostile. "She's told us about you, too." Emma accepted Marcus's handshake as well, studying his face with the intense observation skills she'd inherited from me. "Nice to meet you," she said politely, though her body language remained guarded. "I know this is probably awkward for both of you," Marcus said, addressing them directly rather than talking around them to me. "I want you to know that I understand how strange it must be to suddenly have a new person in your family, especially given everything else that's happening right now." "It is weird," Emma agreed with the bluntness that I'd always admired in her. "But Mom seems happy, so we're trying to be open-minded about it." Marcus smiled at her directness. "Fair enough. I appreciate the open-mindedness, and I hope I can earn your trust over time." Ryan chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen, where he'd been finishing up some phone calls related to his business. The meeting between Marcus and Ryan was the interaction I'd been most nervous about, given the potential for tension and territorial behavior between them. "You must be Marcus," Ryan said, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine civility. "I'm Ryan Thompson." "Nice to meet you, Ryan," Marcus replied, accepting the handshake. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have," Ryan said dryly, but without obvious hostility. "Jessica tells me you're an architect?" "Sustainable commercial design, primarily. I relocated here from San Diego about 8 months ago to expand my firm's presence in the Southwest market." The conversation between them was polite but careful, both men clearly aware that they were navigating territory that could become volatile if either of them said the wrong thing. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for some sign of how this dynamic was going to develop. "Well," Ryan said finally, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet the kids. I know this whole situation is complicated for everyone involved. I'm committed to doing whatever I can to make this transition as smooth as possible for Emma and Tyler, Marcus replied. They're the most important people in Jessica's life, which makes them important to me too. Tyler, who had been listening to this exchange with obvious interest, stepped forward slightly. Can I ask you something directly? Of course. What are your intentions with our mom? Like long-term? The question was remarkably mature for an 18-year-old, but it also carried the protective edge of a young man who had just watched his father betray his mother's trust. Tyler wanted assurance that Marcus wasn't going to put me through another cycle of disappointment and heartbreak. My intention is to build a life with your mother that makes her happy and fulfilled, Marcus answered without hesitation. I love her, I respect her, and I'm committed to supporting her goals and dreams rather than asking her to sacrifice them for mine. And us? Emma asked. What role do you expect to play in our lives? It was exactly the right question, the one that would determine whether Marcus understood the boundaries and expectations that came with marrying a woman with teenage children. Whatever role feels comfortable to all of us, Marcus said thoughtfully. I'm not trying to replace your father or to force a relationship that doesn't develop naturally, but I hope that over time, we can become friends, and that you'll feel like you can trust me to be a positive presence in your mom's life. Emma and Tyler exchanged another one of their wordless communications before Emma nodded slightly. That sounds reasonable. Are you planning to have kids together? Tyler asked, echoing the question Emma had posed to me earlier. Marcus glanced at me briefly before answering. That's something your mom and I have discussed, but it's not an immediate priority. Right now, we're focused on building our relationship with each other and with both of you. Any decisions about expanding our family would be made together, with consideration for how they might affect everyone involved. Ryan, who had been observing this exchange with interest, spoke up again. I should probably head out and let you all have dinner together. Jessica, we can finish reviewing those documents tomorrow if that works for you. That sounds fine, I agreed. Thank you for being so cooperative about all of this. Ryan gathered his things and headed toward the door, pausing to speak quietly to Emma and Tyler. I know today has been overwhelming for both of you. If you want to talk about any of this, or if you have questions about what happens next, you can always call me. After Ryan left, the four of us settled into the dining room for a meal that Marcus had thoughtfully arranged to be delivered from a local restaurant. He'd chosen a family-friendly Italian place that offered options for different tastes, demonstrating the kind of consideration for others' preferences that had become one of his most endearing qualities to me. Dinner conversations started awkwardly, but gradually became more natural as Emma and Tyler began asking Marcus about his work, his background, and his interests outside of his relationship with me. He answered their questions openly and honestly, sharing stories about his childhood in California, his education and career development, and his decision to relocate to Arizona. What's the most interesting project you've worked on? Emma asked, and I could tell that her initial wariness was beginning to give way to genuine curiosity. Marcus's face lit up as he described a sustainable housing development he'd designed for a nonprofit organization in San Diego. A project that combined innovative environmental technology with affordable housing solutions. His passion for his work was evident as he explained the challenges and creative solutions involved in the design process. Tyler, who had always been interested in engineering and construction, began asking more technical questions about building materials and energy systems. Soon, he and Marcus were deep in conversation about solar panel efficiency and water reclamation systems, finding common ground in their shared appreciation for problem-solving and innovation. Mom, Emma said during a lull in the technical discussion, can I talk to you privately for a minute? We stepped into the kitchen, leaving Marcus and Tyler to continue their conversation about sustainable architecture. What do you think? I asked, trying to read Emma's expression. He seems nice, she said carefully. Really nice, actually. Like genuinely nice, not just trying to impress us nice. He is nice. That's one of the things I love about him. Emma nodded, considering this. I can see why you fell for him. He listens when people talk, and he seems really interested in what Tyler's saying about engineering stuff. Dad never really paid attention when Tyler talked about technical things. The comparison between Marcus and Ryan was inevitable, but hearing Emma articulate the differences so clearly made me realize how much my children had noticed about their father's decreasing engagement with their interests and activities. What else are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking that if you're happy, then I want to support that. And I'm thinking that maybe it's good for Tyler and me to see what a healthy relationship looks like, since apparently we haven't been seeing that with you and Dad. Emma's maturity continued to astound me. At 16, she was already thinking about relationships and family dynamics with a sophistication that would serve her well as she navigated her own romantic relationships in the years to come. I'm also thinking that this is all happening really fast, she continued. But I guess when you know, right? Sometimes yes. But I also want you to know that Marcus and I are committed to taking things slowly when it comes to blending our families. We don't want you and Tyler to feel pressured to accept changes that don't feel natural to you. When we returned to the dining room, Tyler and Marcus were still engrossed in their conversation, but now they were discussing college plans and career goals. Marcus was asking thoughtful questions about Tyler's interests and offering insights about different engineering specializations based on his own experience working with various types of professionals. What about you, Emma? Marcus asked, turning his attention to my daughter. Your mom tells me you're an excellent student with interests in several different areas. I'm thinking about double majoring in psychology and business, Emma replied. I'm interested in organizational psychology, helping companies create better work environments for their employees. That's fascinating, Marcus said, and I could tell he genuinely meant it. Have you had a chance to do any internships or volunteer work in those areas? As Emma described her volunteer work with a local nonprofit organization, I found myself observing the interaction with growing optimism. Marcus was engaging with my children as individuals with their own interests and goals, rather than simply as extensions of his relationship with me. He was asking questions that demonstrated real curiosity about who they were and what they cared about. More importantly, Emma and Tyler were responding to his attention in ways that suggested they were beginning to see him as a potential ally rather than as an intruder in their family life. The conversation was flowing naturally, marked by laughter and genuine interest on all sides. Can I ask you guys something? Marcus said as we were finishing dessert. What do you need from me to feel comfortable with this situation? Are there boundaries you'd like me to respect, or ways you'd prefer for me to interact with your family? The question demonstrated exactly the kind of emotional intelligence that had drawn me to Marcus in the first place. Instead of assuming that he knew what was best for everyone, he was asking my children to articulate their own needs and preferences. Tyler considered the question seriously before answering. I think I just want you to be yourself, but also to understand that Mom is the most important person in our lives. If you hurt her the way Dad did, you'll have to deal with us. The protective edge in Tyler's voice was unmistakable, but it was delivered without hostility. He was simply establishing expectations for how Marcus should treat me, based on his recent experience watching his father's betrayal. That's completely fair, Marcus replied. I never want to hurt your mother, and I hope that if you ever see me behaving in ways that concern you, you'll feel comfortable talking to me about it directly. Emma's contribution was more practical. I think I'd like to get to know you better. Before we start doing family activities together, like maybe we could have dinner together once a week for a while, just to get used to having you around. That sounds perfect, Marcus agreed. We can go at whatever pace feels right to everyone. As the evening wound down and Marcus prepared to leave, I felt cautiously optimistic about how the introduction had gone. My children hadn't instantly embraced him as a new family member, but they'd treated him with respect and openness that suggested they were willing to give our relationship a chance. "Thank you for tonight," I told Marcus as he prepared to drive back to his own apartment. We'd decided that it was important for him to maintain his own space during the initial transition period, rather than moving directly into my new place, and overwhelming Emma and Tyler with too many changes at once. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he replied, taking my hands in his. "I know how much Emma and Tyler mean to you, and I don't take lightly the fact that you're letting me become part of their lives." "How do you think it went?" "Better than I'd hoped, honestly. They're remarkable kids, Jessica. You should be incredibly proud of the people they're becoming." After Marcus left, Emma and Tyler helped me clean up the dinner dishes, working together with the comfortable efficiency that comes from years of shared household responsibilities. "So, Tyler," said as we loaded the dishwasher, "verdict?" "He's nice," Emma said, echoing her earlier assessment. "Really nice. And he clearly adores Mom, which is kind of sweet to see." "Yeah, I noticed that too," Tyler agreed. "The way he looks at her is completely different from how Dad's been looking at her lately." Their observations reminded me how much children notice about their parents' relationships, even when the adults think they're hiding their problems successfully. Emma and Tyler had been watching Ryan and me grow distant and disconnected, probably hoping that we'd find our way back to happiness, but also recognizing that we weren't succeeding. "Are you okay with me being married to him?" I asked directly, wanting to make sure they felt free to express any reservations they might have. "I think so," Emma said slowly. "I mean, it's weird that you're already married when we just met him tonight. But he seems like a good person, and you seem happier than you've been in a long time." Tyler nodded in agreement. "I like that he didn't try to be our instant best friend or act like he was going to solve all our family problems. He was just normal, real." Their acceptance wasn't complete or unconditional, but it was genuine, and it gave me hope that we could successfully navigate the complexities of blending our families over time. The following weekend, as we'd planned, Emma and Tyler helped me move into my new loft in downtown Phoenix. The space was everything I'd hoped for when I'd chosen it. Bright, modern, with huge windows that overlooked the city skyline and the distant mountains. It was completely different from the suburban house where we'd lived for over a decade, representing a fresh start in every possible way. Marcus was there to help with the heavy lifting, and I watched with growing happiness as he and Tyler worked together to assemble furniture and arrange boxes. Emma took charge of organizing the kitchen, asking thoughtful questions about my cooking preferences, and making suggestions about how to arrange things for maximum efficiency. "This is really nice, Mom," Emma said as we took a break to order pizza for lunch. "It feels like you. Not like you trying to be someone else, but like the real you." "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. It's just different. More colorful, more interesting. The house in Scottsdale always felt like it was designed to impress other people. This feels like it was designed to make you happy." Emma's observation was more perceptive than she probably realized. The house I'd shared with Ryan had indeed been chosen and decorated primarily to reflect his success and status, with my own preferences taking a back seat to considerations about what would look impressive to his business associates and clients. The loft, by contrast, was filled with art that I loved, books that I actually wanted to read, and furniture that prioritized comfort and functionality over appearances. For the first time in years, I was living in a space that reflected my own tastes and values rather than someone else's expectations. "Your room is awesome," Tyler announced, emerging from the bedroom that would be his when he stayed with me. "The view is incredible, and there's enough space for all my stuff." Emma's room was equally appealing to her, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat that she immediately claimed as her favorite reading spot. Both children seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of spending time in the new space, which alleviated one of my biggest concerns about the move. As the day progressed and the loft began to feel like home, I found myself marveling at how much my life had changed in just a few short months. 8 months ago, I'd been a suburban wife whose identity was largely defined by her relationship to her husband and children. Today, I was a downtown professional with my own successful career, my own financial independence, and a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "Mom," Emma said as we were putting finishing touches on her room, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever feel guilty about being so happy? Like, I know Dad hurt you really badly, and I know our family is basically falling apart. But you seem, I don't know, lighter than you've been in years. Is it okay to feel happy when everything else is kind of a mess?" Her question touched on something I'd been struggling with myself. Was it appropriate to feel joy and excitement about my new life when my children were dealing with the trauma of their parents' divorce? Was I being selfish to prioritize my own happiness when my decisions were causing disruption and confusion for Emma and Tyler? "I think it's not only okay but necessary," I said finally. "For too many years I was unhappy but trying to hide it because I thought that was what being a good mother and wife required. But what I've learned is that my unhappiness was actually making me a worse mother and wife, not a better one." "How so?" "When I was constantly frustrated and unfulfilled, I had less patience, less energy, less joy to share with you and Tyler. I was going through the motions of family life without really being present for it. Now that I'm in a relationship that makes me genuinely happy, now that I'm pursuing work that excites me, now that I'm living authentically instead of just trying to meet other people's expectations, I have so much more to offer the people I love." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think I can see that. You've been more available lately, like more yourself when we're talking." Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying a box labeled Emma's books with obvious care. "Where would you like this?" he asked. "Those can go on the built-in shelves," Emma directed. "Thanks for helping with all of this. I know you probably had other things you could have been doing today." "There's nowhere I'd rather be," Marcus replied simply. "This is important to your mom, which makes it important to me." After he'd left to retrieve another box, Emma turned to me with a small smile. "He's good for you, isn't he?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "He really is." As evening approached and the loft began to feel like a real home, Tyler made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to stay here tonight," he said. "I mean, if that's okay. I know we haven't worked out the official custody schedule yet, but I'd like to try sleeping here and see how it feels." "Are you sure?" I asked. "You don't have to rush into anything." "I'm sure. Dad's been kind of weird and moody since everything came out, and I think he could use some space to figure out his own stuff. Plus, I want to make sure this place actually feels like home, not just like visiting." Emma decided to join him, and before I knew it, we were having an impromptu first sleepover in my new home. Marcus offered to leave to give us family time, but both kids encouraged him to stay, suggesting that we order Chinese food and watch a movie together. It was the first time all 4 of us had spent an extended period together in a relaxed, casual setting, and I was struck by how natural it felt. Marcus and Tyler continued their ongoing conversation about sustainable technology, while Emma showed Marcus her favorite books and explained why she'd chosen psychology as a potential major. "This is nice," Emma said as we settled in to watch a comedy that everyone could agree on. "It feels like a real family." Her comment made me realize that despite all the upheaval and uncertainty of the past few months, we were actually succeeding in creating something new and potentially wonderful from the ruins of what had come before. It wasn't the family structure I'd planned for when I'd first married Ryan, but it was authentic and loving in ways that our previous family dynamic had never quite achieved. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, custody negotiations, and practical adjustments to our new living arrangements. Ryan and I worked with our respective attorneys to finalize divorce terms that prioritized Emma and Tyler's needs while ensuring fair division of our assets. The process was complicated by the financial irregularities that James Wilson's investigation had uncovered, but ultimately we reached agreements that allowed both of us to move forward with dignity, intact. Ryan's relationship with Amanda continued, though it seemed to be proceeding more cautiously than either of them had initially planned. The public nature of their debut at Kevin's wedding had created family tensions that Ryan was still working to resolve, particularly with his mother Patricia, who made no secret of her disapproval of the timeline and circumstances of their relationship. For my part, I found myself settling into a rhythm of life that felt both exciting and sustainable. My expanded role at the marketing firm was challenging and rewarding, providing the professional fulfillment I'd been missing for years. The downtown loft became a true home, filled with friends, laughter, and the kind of intellectual conversations that had been absent from my life during the later years of my marriage to Ryan. Most importantly, my relationship with Marcus continued to deepen and grow stronger as we navigated the complexities of blending our lives together. He proved to be everything he'd seemed during our early months together: patient, supportive, genuinely interested in my success and happiness, and committed to building a partnership based on equality and mutual respect. Emma and Tyler adapted to our new family structure with remarkable resilience, splitting their time between Ryan's house and my loft in ways that seemed to work for everyone involved. They developed genuine affection for Marcus over time, coming to see him not as a replacement for their father, but as an additional supportive adult in their lives. 6 months after that tumultuous night at Kevin's wedding, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to where I stood. The woman who had sat frozen at table 7, watching her husband dance with his ex-girlfriend, felt like a different person entirely. That woman had been afraid of change, dependent on others for her sense of worth, and willing to accept disrespect rather than risk the uncertainty of independence. The woman I'd become was confident in her own value, professionally successful, financially independent, and surrounded by people who loved and respected her for who she actually was, rather than for the role she played in their lives. I was Jessica Rivera now, and while that name was still new enough to occasionally catch me by surprise, it represented everything I'd fought to become. Marcus found me on our loft's balcony one evening, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the path that had led us here. "Penny for your thoughts?" he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago," I replied, leaning back against his chest. "How different I am. Any regrets?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about the pain and uncertainty of the past year, the difficulty of watching my children navigate their parents' divorce, the challenges of starting over in so many areas of my life. "No," I said finally. "No regrets. It was hard, and it hurt, and there were times when I wasn't sure I was strong enough to get through it. But I wouldn't change anything about how it turned out. Not even the timeline? The way everything happened so quickly once it started? Especially not the timeline. If I'd waited longer to act, if I'd tried to save a marriage that was already over, if I'd let fear keep me from taking risks for my own happiness, I might never have found the courage to become who I was meant to be." Marcus tightened his arms around me, and I felt the familiar surge of gratitude for the love and partnership we'd built together. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for your courage, your strength, your commitment to building a life that makes you happy." As we stood together watching the sun set over the Arizona desert, I thought about the envelope I'd placed beside Ryan's champagne glass that night at the wedding. It had contained evidence of his betrayal, documentation of his financial misconduct, and proof that I was far from the naive and powerless woman he'd assumed me to be. But more than that, it had contained my declaration of independence, my refusal to remain a supporting character in my own life story, my commitment to building a future based on truth, respect, and authentic love rather than on convenience, obligation, and the fear of change. The dance floor confrontation that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The moment when Ryan chose to humiliate me publicly had become the moment when I chose to reclaim my power and reshape my destiny. And the woman who had walked out of that ballroom with her head held high had emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable of creating the life she deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.